Colleen Walsh was 19 when her mother told her something that etched itself into the marrow of her identity. "Not everyone is meant to be exceptional, sweetheart," Marilyn Walsh had said, her voice soft over the morning coffee. "And that's okay. Someone has to support the stars." It wasn't meant to be cruel, it was simply her mother's way, quiet, measured. But those words stayed with Colleen, even as she stood in her freshly pressed officer's uniform, newly commissioned and burning with pride. The sentence didn't scold, it didn't insult, but it cleaved her confidence like a razor splitting glass. It became a silent echo, haunting holidays, homecomings, and every birthday card signed with polite indifference. Colleen was the eldest in a family that worshipped uniforms and upheld discipline like gospel. They were 3 generations deep into military service. Her father, Roy Walsh, had retired from the Air Force as a decorated colonel. Her mother had patched wounds in the desert as a combat medic. Her younger brother had climbed to major, and her baby sister Erica was rocketing toward lieutenant colonel with the kind of family-backed fanfare usually reserved for returning astronauts. Colleen? She had disappeared. They never outright called her a failure, but silence, deliberate, clinical silence, can scream louder than scorn. When Erica got her promotion, the family threw a reception that looked like a state dinner. The Facebook post alone got 412 likes. When Colleen returned from a classified deployment, no one even showed up at the airport. Her father muttered something about her being so busy, as if she'd skipped a dentist appointment, instead of enduring 7 months of high-risk Black Ops missions across borders even the news wouldn't name. That Thanksgiving, her usual seat at the family table was filled by a neighbor's son who'd gotten into law school. A big deal, apparently. Colleen ate cold turkey while standing at the sink, her medals still packed in a box in the garage, still smelling faintly of oil, sand, and blood. That night, something broke. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just told herself she was done. Done chasing approval. Done trying to be seen by a family that had long since decided she was the wrong shape to fit in their perfect picture. She had faced enemy fire. She'd walked blindfolded into urban combat. She didn't need to keep fighting for a seat at her own family's dinner table. What Colleen couldn't know was that a reckoning was coming. One she didn't ask for, but deeply deserved. It was just another Thursday when it happened. Colleen had been sitting in the back row of a command briefing, half listening to logistics updates while scrolling through encrypted reports. She was there only as an observer, a formality tied to her current role advising post-op tactical coordination. Then the door opened. A high-ranking commander entered. The room buzzed with shifting chairs and cleared throats. Names and ranks passed like currency across the space. But then the general paused. He scanned the room once, twice, and then he locked eyes with her. Colleen sat still, rigid. The general straightened, squared his shoulders, and said the words no one in that room expected. "Ma'am, you're the general?" Silence collapsed into the room like a detonation. Not for Erica, not for her father or brother, for Colleen. In that moment, the air shifted, sharpened. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't triumphant. It was exacting. Sharp. Decisive. The kind of silence that breaks decades of invisibility. That moment didn't rewrite the past, but it cracked something open in her. For the first time, she wasn't embarrassed to take up space. Colleen Walsh was born into military heritage the way some are born into royalty. Her family didn't just serve, they lived the code. Discipline, order, service. The Walsh household functioned more like a barracks than a home. Beds were made at dawn, shoes polished until they reflected the ceiling fan. They were stationed near Fort Campbell, Kentucky, not just a base, but a way of life. Her father, Colonel Roy Walsh, was known for his steely leadership and uncanny memory for operational details. Her mother, Marilyn, had patched battlefield wounds and changed diapers in the same breath. Her brother, Sean, could recite command protocol before he hit high school. And then there was Erica, the golden child, always smiling, always polished, rising through the ranks like she was born to salute. Colleen, by contrast, didn't take the straight path. She joined West Point and lasted a year. At least, that's what the family was told. What really happened? Colleen was recruited into an off-books intelligence division, so classified it technically didn't exist. No graduation photo, no honors board, just a handshake, a folder of forged discharge papers, and a one-way ticket to a black site somewhere off the grid. To her family, she became The Quitter, a story edited out of the Walsh photo albums. But Colleen hadn't disappeared. She had simply been repurposed into a shadow. For the next 2 decades, her life played out across the blurred lines of geopolitics. She had sent encrypted orders from Damascus, hid inside false walls in Libya during a 4-day siege, lost comrades in Operation Candlestrike, a mission still redacted in every official record. But at the Walsh dinner table, "She's working in admin now, I think," Erica once said, with a smile so smooth it might have been rehearsed. The family didn't need to disown her, they just edited her out. The invitation came by phone. No warmth, no enthusiasm, just, "Erica's getting promoted, you should come, don't wear anything weird." Colleen paused. Her mother's voice wasn't cruel, just cold, like ice on metal. She agreed anyway, not for celebration, not for reconciliation. She was going to see, really see, if they were capable of looking at her for who she had become. That night, she packed 2 outfits, her old dress uniform, still starched, never worn, and a neutral blouse and slacks. Quiet clothes for a quiet presence. As she looked in the mirror, her own face startled her, sun-lined eyes, lips that hadn't smiled in months, a face neither young nor old, just real, no rank, no medals, no expectation, just resolve. She arrived at Fort Campbell right on time. The MP barely looked up. No fanfare. The Walsh home stood unchanged, beige siding, a tired flag rippling on a wooden post. The porch swing creaked like it remembered her weight. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner and buried emotion. Her mother greeted her with instructions, not affection. "Go change your shirt. You'll be seated next to Erica. Please don't interrupt her speech." No hug, no thank you for coming. Just expectations. As always. Her father's welcome wasn't much warmer. A nod, a clap on the back, words stripped of feeling. But Erica? Erica glided into the room like royalty, in full dress blues, bars gleaming, ribbons polished. She kissed hands and made jokes. The room danced around her. Then she gestured vaguely toward Colleen. "This is my sister," she said. "She used to be in the military for a bit. Works in admin now, I think." A cousin chuckled. "VA office, right? Better than nothing." Colleen smiled politely, letting it die there. Silence, in this case, wasn't weakness. It was armor. She walked the house later, trailing her fingers across picture frames, each one a curated shrine to someone else's success. Erica's commissioning, Sean's wedding and uniform, her father's retirement gala. She didn't exist in any of them. One niece, no more than 7, tugged at her sleeve. "Did you ever shoot a real gun?" she asked, eyes wide. Colleen crouched to her level and said, "Sweetheart, I once wrote a plan that brought 30 soldiers home. That's better than any bullet I ever fired." The girl nodded solemnly, then ran off to play with a plastic tank. That night, dinner was a tight circle of family and officers. Erica sparkled, as always. Her speech. Later, she stepped onto the porch alone. Behind her, laughter echoed like ghosts. Ahead, the night hummed with military music rehearsals and shifting leaves. Tomorrow, Erica would take center stage, but truth has its own schedule, and tomorrow it was ready to speak. The auditorium at Fort Campbell felt more like a chapel than a hall, a place built for reverence, not celebration. High ceilings, spotless brass fixtures, and chairs arranged by rank like soldiers at parade rest. The Walsh family was seated in row 3, section F. Family, unassigned, bureaucratically respectful, personally cold. Colleen's seat was flanked by a junior officer's fiancé and an aunt wearing far too much perfume. No one from her family sat beside her. The implication was clear. She was family, but not close family, present but not essential. At the front stood Erica, radiant in uniform, posture perfect, smile calculated. She stood beneath an American flag so pristine it looked ironed. Every detail of her appearance seemed tuned for prestige. Her speech began with predictable notes: loyalty, dedication, grit. Then came the Hearn. She leaned into the mic, her voice dripping with restrained fire. And sometimes true strength comes from choosing not to walk away from the uniform, even when others do. The subtext wasn't just clear, it was laser-guided. Several heads turned toward Colleen. One officer whispered, "That's the sister, right? I think she dropped out of West Point." Another murmured, "She looks familiar, but from where?" Colleen sat unmoving. Her posture, as always, unreadable. A masterclass in stillness. But inside, her pulse beat like a distant drumline. Then the door at the rear opened. In walked General Hammond. A quiet wave of motion followed him. Subtle shifts in posture, unconscious straightening of backs. His presence wasn't loud, it was gravitational. He scanned the room, then stopped, his eyes locked on Colleen. And then, the moment no one expected, General Hammond approached her row, came to attention, and offered a perfect salute. "Ma'am," he said clearly, "General Walsh, it's an honor to see you again." The oxygen left the room. Every pair of eyes in the hall swung to Colleen. Erica's voice caught mid-sentence, her fingers trembling around her note cards. Colleen stood slowly and returned the salute, not for glory, not for validation, but because honor, when offered, must be met in kind. In the corner of her eye, she saw her mother drop her water glass. It shattered against the tile like a shot. Her father half stood before sinking back down, eyes wide. Someone behind her whispered, "The ghost commander from Dagger?" Colleen didn't flinch. The remainder of Erica's speech stumbled forward, words now robbed of their stage. Applause at the end was polite, but hollow. The crowd's energy had shifted. Their perception had After the ceremony, the crowd thinned. Colleen lingered near the exit, knowing full well she was now the gravitational center no one wanted to admit to orbiting. Erica found her first. Her heels clipped furiously against the polished floor. "You could have said something," she hissed. "You let me stand up there looking like an idiot." Colleen looked at her, not cruelly, not smugly, just truthfully. "If your truth can't withstand reality," she said quietly, "then maybe it was never that strong to begin with." Erica's mouth tightened. Her mascara did little to shield the tears that welled but didn't fall. She blinked rapidly and turned away. Colleen walked out of the hall alone, but for the first time she didn't feel alone. The space behind her felt uncertain, reconsidering. Back at her temporary quarters, she kicked off her boots and spotted something strange, a manila envelope, no label, no seal, just sitting. Inside was a scan of an email, dated 2 years earlier, no sender. The subject line, "Reckless Operation, Civilian Casualties." It named Colleen directly, accused her of leading an unsanctioned mission that resulted in the deaths of multiple non-combatants. The email begged a fringe military blog to expose the rot from within. The language chilled her. She recognized it, not just the op, but the phrasing. It was lifted nearly word for word from a classified after-action report she'd read in Stuttgart. That report had only been seen by 3 people: herself, the analyst, and one junior officer with partial clearance. Erica. Suddenly it all fit. The smear campaign, the sudden, brief red flag investigation 2 years ago, the missing family support, the orchestrated whispers. Colleen's own sister hadn't just erased her from family photos. She had tried to delete her from history. When she confronted Erica the next evening, the setting was poetic. Under the stars, outside the post-promotion party. The music inside muffled the tension outside. Colleen held up the printout. "Did you send this?" she asked. Erica didn't blink. "Yes." "Why?" Her answer came like a tired confession. "Because you weren't supposed to win." She spoke faster now, her words cracking. "You left. You didn't stay. You vanished. But they still talked about you. Even when you weren't around, you were the story. I thought, if I erased you, I'd finally be enough." Silence opened between them like a canyon. Colleen's voice didn't rise. "You do realize leaking classified information is a federal offense?" Erica paled, then nodded once. Her lips pressed tight, too tight to cry. Colleen didn't file charges. She didn't scream. She just walked away, into the cold night, clutching a printout that had once meant sabotage, but now meant closure. Colleen didn't sleep that night. She lay fully clothed atop the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling fan, spinning in circles that never moved forward. The email sat on the desk like a landmine she'd already stepped on. Then came the alarm, not the soft reveille that typically echoed across Fort Campbell. This was different, sharp, piercing, urgent. Her phone lit up, a second later, with a high-clearance notification. "Emergency protocol active. All strategic personnel to Operations Command. Immediate." She moved without hesitation. Decades of conditioning took over. Within 5 minutes, she was out the door, dressed and armed with only her badge, her brain, and a strange sense of déjà vu. The base was chaos. Not panicked, controlled, but urgent. Officers jogged across corridors in mismatched uniforms. Some were still half-dressed, boots untied. The hum of alerts was constant. And somewhere in the background, generators kicked on, feeding life into screens that glowed with encrypted chaos. At the operations center, a grim-faced sergeant handed Colleen a file. It was thin, but heavy. Inside, a summary of a breach. A classified dossier from Operation Dagger had been leaked to an encrypted forum on the dark web. The timestamp? Just under 3 hours ago. Worse, the digital trail traced back to an internal IP address, an inactive device, a device once assigned to her. Colleen felt like she'd been thrown into someone else's nightmare, except the fingerprints were hers, her credentials, her command, and her reputation on the line. Within the hour, she sat across from General Hammond and 2 officials from military intelligence. The room was frigid, not in temperature, tone. They didn't say, "You're under investigation," but they didn't have to. She handed over every password, every device, full digital access, no hesitation. Still, something didn't sit right. A gut feeling from years in the field that this wasn't a random attack. It was too aligned. She thought back to the email Erica had admitted to sending. What if that wasn't just an isolated betrayal? What if that email had done more than just poison her family? What if it had unlocked a door? Using the military's secure forensic software, Colleen backtracked the anonymous email. It wasn't easy. Whoever sent it had used an outdated backup relay system, one Colleen had assumed was decommissioned years ago. Except it wasn't. Not entirely. That outdated link triggered a dormant process on the server, a process that, unbeknownst to Erica, attached a hidden file, one that contained fragments of Operation Dagger's classified mission briefings. The person who sent the email never meant to leak that file, but they triggered it anyway. When she followed the chain, the sender's machine pinged back to a workstation recently logged into by only one person in the last 72 hours. Erica Walsh. 2 days ago, she'd told Colleen that she left her laptop overnight at the comm station. Colleen remembered the tone. Casual. Too casual. She didn't want to believe it. But the data didn't lie. She was staring at a forensic trail that led straight to her sister's door. Before she could process the truth, a knock echoed through her room. Slow, steady. Her father, Colonel Roy Walsh. They hadn't spoken privately in years. He didn't enter. He just stood at the threshold. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice lower than she remembered. "Did you leak it?" Colleen looked up, saw not anger in his eyes, but fear. Not for his daughter, for his legacy, for the Walsh name. "I don't need you to believe me," she said, "but I will prove the truth. Not for me, for the people still trusting this system with their lives." He gave a slight nod and left. The next morning, Colleen requested permission to lead the internal investigation. It was unusual, but not impossible. She was still technically classified Strategic Reserve, with clearance above most active duty officers. And she had what no one else did: motive. Not to bury the breach, but to trace it to the end, to rebuild trust, starting from inside the wound. General Hammond watched her as she spoke, measured, clear, controlled. Then, without a word, he stood, walked around the table, and held out his hand. "General," he said, "the floor is yours." The Strategic Command briefing room at Fort Campbell was never meant to feel like home. Stark white walls, cold LED lighting, a subtle hum in the ceiling that made silence feel louder. Now, for the first time in her career, Colleen sat at its head, authorized, in charge, and oddly unsettled. She was flanked by representatives from Military Investigation Bureau and Base Security Command, each watching her like a data point with legs. Across from her, blank notebooks, open tablets, and an unspoken question lingering in the air. Could she be impartial in a case that was bleeding into her own family? She began the meeting with calm authority. "This wasn't an intentional act of sabotage," she said. "It was a cascade, reckless decisions, misunderstood systems, and one anonymous email that pulled the pin." She presented everything: the server metadata, access logs, the residual trail, a digital breadcrumb that began with Erica's email and ended in an untraceable leak. No one disputed her logic, but they weren't ready for her solution. General Hammond, arms crossed, leaned forward. "Fine," he said. "You want to run this? Then you run it. But you do it with transparency." And then the hammer dropped. "We're assigning you a task force, comprised of your family." Colleen stared at him. Her expression didn't change, but internally, something twisted. Her father, retired Colonel Roy Walsh, would manage archive access. Her mother, Marilyn, would assist with forensic recovery using her old combat medic expertise and certification in biological trace sampling. Erica, her accuser, would trace vulnerabilities in the internal system. It felt like a cruel joke. A team of people who had spent years ignoring her now depended on her to hold the walls upright. The first task force meeting was clinical. Her father spoke in clipped sentences, eyes glued to his laptop. It wasn't coldness, it was his way of not showing discomfort or regret. Erica presented next. Her section was efficient, emotionless. She didn't look up once. Her voice was monotone, her jaw clenched. Only Marilyn occasionally glanced between her daughters, like a ghost seeing echoes of a family she couldn't reach. But Colleen? She didn't need warmth. She needed results, and she got one. A breakthrough came while combing through Erica's server access logs. The system's AI flagged a dormant Trojan embedded in a 2017 logistics archive. The Trojan had never activated, just slept, undisturbed, buried deep inside old deployment files. The date stood out: That was the year Colleen had clashed with Derek Glade, a fellow strategist. During a campaign in Mosul, Glade had pushed for aggressive civilian sweeps. Colleen had refused, insisting on phased containment instead. It had been the right call. Tactically, the Strategic Command briefing room at Fort Campbell was never meant to feel like home. Stark white walls, cold LED lighting, a subtle hum in the ceiling that made silence feel louder. Now, for the first time in her career, Colleen sat at its head, authorized, in charge, and oddly unsettled. She was flanked by representatives from Military Investigation Bureau and Base Security Command, each watching her like a data point with legs. Across from her, blank notebooks, open tablets, and an unspoken question lingering in the air. Could she be impartial in a case that was bleeding into her own family? She began the meeting with calm authority. This wasn't an intentional act of sabotage, she said. It was a cascade, reckless decisions, misunderstood systems, and one anonymous email that pulled the pin. She presented everything: the server metadata, access logs, the residual trail, a digital breadcrumb that began with Erica's email and ended in an untraceable leak. No one disputed her logic, but they weren't ready for her solution. General Hammond, arms crossed, leaned forward. "Fine," he said. "You want to run this? Then you run it. But you do it with transparency." And then the hammer dropped. "We're assigning you a task force, comprised of your family." Colleen stared at him. Her expression didn't change, but internally, something twisted. Her father, retired Colonel Roy Walsh, would manage archive access. Her mother, Marilyn, would assist with forensic recovery using her old combat medic expertise and certification in biological trace sampling. Erica, her accuser, would trace vulnerabilities in the internal system. It felt like a cruel joke. A team of people who had spent years ignoring her now depended on her to hold the walls upright. The first task force meeting was clinical. Her father spoke in clipped sentences, eyes glued to his laptop. It wasn't coldness, it was his way of not showing discomfort or regret. Erica presented next. Her section was efficient, emotionless. She didn't look up once. Her voice was monotone, her jaw clenched. Only Marilyn occasionally glanced between her daughters, like a ghost seeing echoes of a family she couldn't reach. But Colleen? She didn't need warmth. She needed results, and she got one. A breakthrough came while combing through Erica's server access logs. The system's AI flagged a dormant Trojan embedded in a 2017 logistics archive. The Trojan had never activated, just slept, undisturbed, buried deep inside old deployment files. The date stood out. That was the year Colleen had clashed with Derek Glade, a fellow strategist. During a campaign in Mosul, Glade had pushed for aggressive civilian sweeps. Colleen had refused, insisting on phased containment instead. It had been the right call, tactically. Glade once held a temporary encryption override for the archive servers. If he'd planted a Trojan then, waiting for the right trigger, Erica's accidental access could have been the spark. Colleen's mother, without a word, handed her a folder she'd kept. It was from Operation Candlestrike. "You left it behind when you shipped out," she said softly. "Back then I thought you were hiding. Now, I think you were just trying to survive." Colleen didn't speak. She couldn't. Those weren't apologies. They were something more sacred: recognition. Later that evening, the forensic software caught a ping from a remote IP. Someone had tried to scrub logs tied to the original breach. The location? A cheap motel 10 miles outside base. Registered 3 days earlier, paid in cash. The name used on the reservation? Derek Glade. It was bigger than just Erica now. Someone had watched their family crumble and used it as cover. The enemy wasn't just internal. It was opportunistic, and it was waiting. The raid came down like a rolling thundercloud. By the time the tactical team surrounded the decommissioned tech bunker, silence had settled over the perimeter. Not hesitation, discipline. Colleen was there, dressed in black field gear, standing just behind the lead breach officer. She didn't need to be. She wasn't cleared for field op leadership anymore. But this mission wasn't about protocol. It was personal. Inside, Derek Glade sat hunched over a laptop, just like she'd imagined. The old bunker, once forgotten and dormant, was still wired into a secondary military net. Glade had returned to the one place no one monitored, the one place where broken systems didn't get patched, just buried. He was mid-upload. A compressed data bundle, pulsing with classified attachments, ticking toward a digital detonation. The door burst open. He didn't resist. He didn't even look surprised. He simply raised his hands, turned to face her, and said, "Took you long enough." In interrogation, Glade was composed, not smug, resigned. He laid it all out. He'd watched Colleen climb the ranks, watched her be trusted with councils, strategic seats, think tanks. "She rose too fast," he said. "People stopped questioning her. I just wanted her out of the room." He hadn't meant to destroy her, just remove her. The email wasn't meant to be lethal, it was bait, a trigger to raise questions, strip her clearance, undermine her influence. But then Erica had unknowingly lit the fuse. And Glade? He just waited for the building to burn. He hadn't hacked into anything. He hadn't needed to. He used their dysfunction as camouflage, their silence as cover. When Colleen shared the transcript with Erica, her sister sat motionless, eyes glued to the page. "I didn't know," Erica said softly, almost to herself. "I didn't know what I did would lead." Erica blinked rapidly, holding it together by sheer will. That was Erica, always composed, even while breaking. The report was nearly finished. The team had traced the entire arc of failure, from the anonymous email to the unintentional attachment to the old Trojan that completed the circle. When the final document was submitted to command, Erica attached an addendum. In it, she accepted full responsibility for the initial message that triggered the breach. She acknowledged her mistake, not out of guilt, but out of a painful clarity. She wasn't court-martialed. There was no evidence of intent to leak classified data, but the reprimand would follow her for years. No promotions, no special assignments, just 5 years of gray. She signed the form without being asked. Colleen didn't say anything when she saw the signature. She didn't need to. At the closing task force meeting, the air felt different. Erica sat upright, this time meeting her sister's eyes without flinching. Their father stood for final remarks. His hands trembled slightly as he clutched the page. "I owe an apology," he said slowly, "to this team and especially to General Colleen Walsh." The room was dead silent. "I let medals and pride make me blind to what matters." Colleen didn't smile, neither did Erica, but in that moment, something cracked. Not out of pain, but out of growth. Colleen no longer saw a rival in her sister. She saw a woman, still learning how to stand tall without pushing someone else down to get there. Fog rolled across Fort Campbell like a soft curtain, clinging low to the pavement, as if even the air knew something was about to shift. Inside the command auditorium, over 100 seats were filled with the best minds in modern defense strategy, commanders, analysts, and political advisors from across the country. The banner above the stage read, "Redefining Shadow Warfare, Post-Conflict Intelligence in Asymmetric Environments." Colleen Walsh stood backstage, alone. No handler, no fanfare. Just a clicker in one hand and her field notes in the other. She wasn't there to impress. She was there to reveal. At precisely 0800 hours, the lights dimmed. Colleen stepped onto the stage. No salute, no applause, just presence. she began with the truth. Some missions never get a name. Some leaders never get a plaque. And some battles don't begin at borders. They begin the moment judgment replaces understanding. A ripple of attention swept across the room. Those who had once whispered rumors about her now leaned forward. She spoke plainly about modern warfare, not just the tech or the terrain, but the moral dilemmas. In Operation Candle, Colleen didn't share it for sympathy. She shared it because truth, when spoken clearly, doesn't need applause. It only needs to be seen. Near the end, she stepped aside from the podium and spoke into a side microphone. Before I close, I'd like to ask one final voice to join this conversation. Lieutenant Colonel Erica Walsh. Gasps murmured through the crowd. Erica, seated in the second row, slowly stood. Her name hadn't been listed as a speaker, but she didn't hesitate. She walked to the podium, her heels clicking softly in the silence, and adjusted the mic. Her voice was steady. Not flawless, but sure. I grew up thinking the person who stood tallest got heard. That recognition meant value. But today, I learned that honor isn't about medals. It's about admitting who you can learn from and being brave enough to listen. Her voice caught slightly, but she didn't stop. The strongest people in this room aren't the ones who shouted loudest. They're the ones who chose silence with dignity. And one of them is my sister. The room stood in ovation, not for Erica, not even just for Colleen, but for something larger, a new truth, a redefined legacy. In the back row, Marilyn Walsh sat with her hands in her lap. She didn't clap, but she nodded. It wasn't approval of a title, it was recognition of a journey. And for Colleen, that was enough. A week later, Colleen sent 3 invitations, not formal, not ceremonial, just handwritten cards with a date, a time, and a place. The old Walsh family home. She arrived early, set the table, took the head seat, the one her father always claimed. They arrived without fanfare. Her mother brought food wrapped in foil. Her father stood by the door longer than he needed. Erica sat without making eye contact. Colleen didn't waste time. "This isn't a dinner for apologies," she said. "It's a space to speak the truth, from my mouth." And so she told them everything. From her recruitment out of West Point to being detained underground in Iraq during a failed exfil, to calling in fire support to save an Allied recon team, decisions that haunted her but never broke her. She told them how she turned down a medal because accepting it would have sparked diplomatic fallout, how her silence wasn't cowardice, it was protection. When she finished, the room didn't move. Then her father whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Colleen looked at him, not angry, just honest. "Because you never asked, and I don't think you would have believed me." Her mother's eyes glistened. Erica said nothing. Then Colleen reached under the table and pulled out a folder. Inside? Erica stood, walked over, and placed a hand on her shoulder. No words, just wait. Her father walked to the family shelf, picked up a framed photo from years ago, one from the barbecue, where Colleen had been cropped out. He looked at it for a long time. "This one's missing someone," he said. "Let's take a new one." Colleen returned to Washington, D.C. 1 week later. Her life didn't change dramatically, at least not on the surface. She still lived alone in her modest apartment, overlooking the Potomac, still rose at 5:30 a.m., still wrote her strategic briefings in black ink on unlined paper, still declined calls after 9 p.m., but something inside her had shifted. She was no longer surviving out of sight. She was now being seen, clearly on her own terms. Each month, she returned to Fort Campbell, not as a relic, but as an instructor. She taught a special seminar, soft strategy and the age of non-traditional combat. Erica never missed a session. She sat in the front row every time, took notes, asked hard questions. Sometimes she challenged Colleen in open discussion. Other times she simply listened, especially when Colleen spoke about missions they had once stood on opposite sides of, without even knowing it. One afternoon after class, Erica stayed behind. She handed Colleen a slim binder. Inside was a training reform proposal, modeled after concepts Colleen had introduced during the task force. "I don't need your signature," Erica said. "Just your thoughts." Colleen read the title page and wrote one word in blue ink across the cover: advance. Their family, once fractured beyond repair, now lived in motion. Maybe not close, but connected. Marilyn mailed handwritten notes to Colleen every month, just a line or two. "Are you eating enough?" one read. Another simply said, "Stay warm." Their father had begun introducing her to others not as the one who left, but as "my daughter, she advises high-level strategy for NATO." There wasn't a new family portrait yet, but one day, Colleen noticed something different. The old picture on the mantel, the one where she'd once been cropped out, had been replaced. In its place was a new photo. She was in it, right where she belonged. At the end of one seminar, a young cadet stayed behind. He was nervous, couldn't have been more than 23. "Ma'am?" he asked. "In war, what's the hardest part?" Colleen paused, not for effect, but for honesty. "Surviving," she said, "without turning into a statue, not turning your wounds into weapons, not hardening into something brittle." The cadet nodded, didn't write anything down. He didn't need to. That evening, she walked behind the training barracks. The sun was setting, a deep orange wash over the landscape. The kind of Inside was a single-serving birthday cake in a plastic container. Blue icing spelled out 3 words: General, Sister, Teacher. Colleen didn't laugh. Leaving, she didn't cry. She just looked at it. And then looked at her sister. She didn't need applause anymore. Didn't need medals or headlines or ceremonies. She just needed this: to be seen, not as a ghost in a shadow war, not as a cropped-out figure in someone else's photo, but as herself, a strategist, a survivor, a leader, a sister, a whole woman. If this story spoke to something deep inside you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, in your workplace, or even in your life, drop a comment below and tell us, what's your quiet strength? Is it your resilience, your loyalty, the way you protect others even when no one notices? Your voice matters. Your truth deserves to be heard, even if you've never said it out loud before. Share your story. Subscribe for more real stories that don't always make headlines, but leave an impact. And if someone in your life needs to hear this message, send it to them right now, because maybe, just maybe, they're the general too.